It's pretty quick, you know, even though it's a long way. I mean, when we went to Okinawa very briefly, um, maybe I think we flew out of there the next day. We stayed overnight and flew out of there the next day. And then I think went to either Wake or Guam uh, just to refuel, and then to Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco. I think it haunted me a great deal because I was um, so drawn to what was there while there were still people I knew there, you know? I mean, the people I left there, uh, some of them would be there for 6, 8 months or more, you know, because like you could become attached to new people working with them, and then they've got a fair amount of time left to do. So I watched the news to see if there was any mention of the areas that we were in, and of course there always was. You know, the jungle can be a beautiful place in a lot of ways. And you get in a triple canopy jungle, it's just little spots of light on the ground. It's like twilight in there. You know, it's dark, even though it's the middle of the afternoon. Oh, I grew up in Alton, Illinois. It's a river town and surrounded by farms. And my father died when I was in fourth grade, and I have a so my sister and my mother and I were just went on by ourselves there, and it was you know it was a good place to grow up. A lot of woods and went fishing and hunting a lot, and uh, there were plenty of jobs for kids to do then, and so it was pleasant. It was a pleasant childhood by and large. I was very interested in the news as a kid. You know, I watched the news every day. So I heard a lot about Vietnam even before there was a great U.S. involvement. I mean, the French War that ended in '54. I was very familiar with that as a child. You know, I'd watch The Big Picture and 20th Century and those kind of documentary shows that were on then. You know. Battle Line, things like that were always interesting to me. I mean, not so much war movies, but actual newsreel footage and historical things. I went to the various recruiters and got information and talked to them a bit. And the Marine Corps recruiter was way on the other side of town, so I had to hitchhike up there. And I had some Army recruiting stuff with me at the time. And he looked through it, and I'm sure he'd seen it all before. He said, "What did the Army recruiter promise you?" So I went through the litany of promises, and he said, now, at this point, this is 1964, you know. He said, the war in Vietnam is getting bigger, and that's where you're going. If you join the Marine Corps, we promise you a pack, a rifle, and a hard time. Um, it's very much like the film Full Metal Jacket, except a lot more punching and kicking. It was I don't know what boot camp is like now, but in 1965 it was extremely brutal physically. Uh, a lot of it was psychological, which I think was very important. It was very, very smart of them to do that, you know. But uh, one thing we were shaving. I was shaving, and you'd all go into the shower, and then you come out, and uh, you'd have to share a sink, and it'd be a mirror like this big, you know. And there was this one guy that I knew. He was brushing his teeth and kind of looking in the mirror before I showed up, you know. And I showed up, and back then we had like the big metal Gillette razors, you know. And I'm shaving over his shoulder, you know, like this. And the drill instructor grabbed both of us, you know, and to attention, and you know, Private Broderick, give me your razor, you know, that kind of stuff. And he took my razor, and he started hitting this guy on the forehead with a razor, and he said, do you need, and every time he'd say a word, he'd punctuate it by hitting him with a razor. Do you need a mirror to brush your teeth? And blood is just running down his face, you know, but, and so then we had to switch positions, of course. And I looked in the mirror, and I could just see this like pink foam around. You know, he wasn't hurt, but it was interesting. You know. But there were always things like that. Every day there were things like that, that the slightest mistake you made was punctuated with some kind of mindless violence, which of course was not mindless. It was made to see you see the folly of a mistake, the painful result of a mistake, a small mistake. Very wise. Well, you get up to the drill instructor throwing the trash can across the floor, you know, bam, bam, bam. A lot of screaming, you know, from him. And then you all jump out of your racks, which is what we call our bunks. You jump out of your racks right away, and you get dressed in lightning speed, you know, just absolutely as fast as you can. Make your rack, and then fall out into formation. But, you know, they'll always call for you to fall out long before you actually have time to complete these tasks. So you're like, people are trying to pull their trousers up and put their shirt on and everything. It's a big mess, you know. And then you fall into formation, and then there's always something wrong. And then you have to do a bunch of push-ups and squat thrusts and jump in the sand pit and get sand kicked in your face, and one or two people have to be called out for doing something else wrong, you know, not doing enough fast enough. And then they have to do a bunch of stuff. And then they might have to stand there with a bucket over their head and sing the Marine Corps hymn or something. And then after some of that, we go off to the chow hall, and you have to study this little booklet of things you're supposed to be able to recite without any hesitation, you know. And then you go to chow, and you have a very limited time to eat, and then the drill instructor just starts throwing. Sometimes they just, you know, if you're not eating fast enough, he'll just take a tray full of food and throw it down the table, and everybody has to fall out outside and do some more squat thrust, maybe run around in a big circle or something stupid, you know. And then we'd go to classes a lot of times, you know. And I think every day we went to one class or another, you know. Whether it might be something physical like hand-to-hand combat, it might just be something else that we need to know, you know. And the day was a long day, you know. We'd come back for noon chow, and then we'd go out and do some more of this. We'd do a lot of running, you know, usually 3 miles, but you'd have to run with boots on and all. So we ran a lot. I think all of us knew we were probably going to Vietnam, you know. There were very few people who didn't. For example, my last duty station after Vietnam and everything else, I was in Hawaii, and there were 80 some of us at the Marine Barracks, Hawaii, and there were only 2 people out of that 80 who hadn't gone to Vietnam yet. So that's your chances of going to Vietnam in the Marine Corps were pretty much like that. But we went to infantry school, and after boot camp, so we did 3 months in boot camp, and then we in what we called ITR at the time, and then after that we went to Schools Battalion. I went to wire. My MOS was wireman, and but I didn't really do that at all. Well, when I got to Vietnam, that we went to wire school for, I think it was 6 weeks or something like that, and then we got our orders there to Vietnam. Well, first I was sent to Okinawa in the Ryukyu Islands near Japan, and I went to 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, which was an infantry battalion, and they were temporarily stationed in Okinawa. They had just come from Vietnam. So the replacements there were maybe, I'd have to guess, probably 15 of us or so. So we were the only ones in the whole battalion of 1,250 guys who had not seen combat. So these guys took us under their wing and basically told us what was expected of us, took good care of us. You do this, don't do that. And we weren't there that long, and we were sent to the Fubai area, which is in I Corps. And started right away. We set up in a big graveyard with very ornate Vietnamese, these big circular graves, very beautiful stuff. And we set up our little poncho tents, just ground cloth type stuff amongst those graves. And we got martyred the first night. And we started operating in south and west of Fubai, which is like the Asia Valley area. We got there very late in the day. It was already getting dark, and we landed. We went from Okinawa to Vietnam on ship, and we went down nets, like you'd see in the movies, and were issued ammunition and grenades. And I really expected it to be a shootout right away. We landed on the beach. There was nothing going on at all, And we got on trucks, and it was dark. And we went to the graveyard, like I was saying, and just set up our gear and got martyred. I really expected things to be worse. I thought that we were going to get shot at right away, And here, as a new guy, you're completely surrounded by people that have all the experience in the world, So I wasn't particularly rattled by it because, you look at these guys, they're not particularly scared. They're joking around and stuff, so they know what they're doing. So it wasn't that scary. The scary things were yet to come. Well, we'd go on operations all the time, and we started going farther and farther north, and in jungle mountains a lot. And so you'd, and when I was in Okinawa, I was sent from the communications section to the mortar section, a weapons section, and I became a radio operator for 81 mortars. So I'd go on patrols and with the infantry, or I would work with the gun section, depending on what was going on. Well, if you're working with the guns, the forward observer would call back to you, and they would take the coordinates, and then they convert it to elevation and deflection, They put that on the guns and fire the fire missions, fire mortar shells on the target. If you're working with the infantry, you would basically take the coordinates and read it back to the mortars. We worked primarily in the DMZ area, sometimes near the Laotian border, very close, probably even inside Laos a little bit. You couldn't really tell exactly where you were. And then sometimes as far as the sea, where you come down from the mountains and it's kind of sand dunes like you'd see in Indiana, It's the area of Vietnam that's very, very narrow, right where the 17th parallel is. Well, the intelligence would find a concentration of North Vietnamese troops, and 3 companies from the battalion would go out on an operation and engage the North Vietnamese there. So it was, if you try to find them, and then you call fire missions on them, and either with 81s and artillery or both, or airstrikes. Well, you always carry as little as possible, but that is still a lot, Like when we'd start an operation, I'd have to carry extra batteries for the radio, which are big. They're about like a brick, and about as heavy. And so you'd carry 2 extra batteries. You'd carry the radio. You'd carry your rifle. As a radio operator, I could have a pistol, but I chose to keep my rifle. And a lot of magazines. I carried probably 18, 20 magazines, because I'd pick magazines up off guys who were killed, as we all would. And so you start out with just 6 magazines, which is what you have issued with your rifle, but you pick up more as you go along. And you might carry 4 or 6 hand grenades. And you'd carry a small medical kit, very little, a folding shovel and trenching tool, and your helmet, your flak jacket. And so you're carrying probably 60, 70 pounds of gear, in all of that. Carry as much ammunition as you can. Carry a couple of bandoliers extra, as to your magazine, depending on what you're doing. If you're just going out of patrol, you might not take as much stuff, but you're starting the operation, you're going to take a lot. And we'd go up to the aid tent when we were back at Dung Ha, and there'd be big piles of equipment taken off of the wounded guys that came in, and we'd go through that and get the extra gear we needed. You'd also carry at least 2 canteens of water, and if you're, it's a real good idea to carry 4, because you can always drink it. It wasn't that you went a long distance so much as that you went up and down hills and through terrain that was really hard to get through. The vines would grab you and pull you back, grab onto your gear, and pull you back. But you might not even go 4 or 5 miles, but it'd take you all day to do it. We'd, when we were at what was called the KGO Bridge, which is not far from Khe Sanh, we'd go on 3 patrols a day, and I, being the radio operator, had to go on all of them. So I'd just get back from a patrol and take a bit of a break, and off I go again, First of all, you're in the weather all the time, no matter what's going on. And in the summertime, and it is, 110 degrees, you think, I cannot wait for the monsoons to start, But when the monsoons start, in the mountains, it is cold because you're wet all the time. When the monsoons start, you get wet, and you never get to dry, except in maybe in a couple of situations, until the monsoons end. So it's absolutely, totally miserable. And a lot of times you're sleeping in flooded foxholes and with water up to here, and just terrible weather, and mosquitoes, and you got to carry all this gear. slipping around in the mud in the monsoons, and then in the summer you're on the verge of heat exhaustion all the time. And when somebody passes out, you know, you guys you have to take turns carrying them, and they do. You know, it just happens. And it's the weather's monstrous. You know, going up those, climbing up those mountains in that choking jungle is rough. We didn't have what you'd call leisure time, really. You know, if we came back from an operation, we would get clean clothes, because when you go on an operation, you just basically take what you're wearing, you know. So by the time you got back, your clothes were tatters and just black with human grease, you know, from the sweat and everything. So you just burn the clothes, you get new clothes, you'd get your gear squared away, and what you could maybe, you know, sit around and clean rifles and talk a bit, maybe sleep and read, maybe, you know. There's not much. I spent 19 months in a battalion, and I was never in a building. You know, I don't know any of our guys that were ever in a building. We were just outside all the time, or under a little poncho tent, you know. There was no, if anything, you just sleep, you know, try to get some sleep, and then you go out again, you know. I didn't see a lot of South Vietnamese, you know, because the areas we were in were not particularly populated, except by sometimes the Montagnard tribes people. If we got down around Phu Bai, there would be civilians around, but we didn't have a lot of interaction with them. Sometimes we'd work with South Vietnamese soldiers, South Vietnamese Marines, South Vietnamese Rangers, a bit, but not much. On one occasion, we worked with what were called popular forces. They were more a South Vietnamese irregular army, and they were of extremely poor quality. And in fact, we killed a couple of them on one of the ambushes. We were working with them in their perimeter, and one of our ambushes killed a couple of what we felt were our own guys, our allies, working with the Viet Cong. That was in the very early days. So, you never know. Well, you know, we'd be on trucks going somewhere, and if we went through a village, we'd throw a bunch of candy to the kids and stuff, you know. I mean, stuff out of our sea rations, chocolate. There was just no real interaction. I met one South Vietnamese infantry officer who, when we were working with the PFs, he was sent there at the same time we were sent there. And he was out of the South Vietnamese 1st Division, very squared away guy, spoke some English. So I talked to him a bit, and I was pretty impressed by him, you know, as trying to do the right thing, you know, for the PFs, but it's pretty hopeless, frankly, in that case. Well, we fought the Viet Cong for just a little while, and then we went north. We fought the North Vietnamese Army from then on, you know. But they're of course the enemy, and you have to do everything you can to get rid of them, to kill them. But at the same time, I think there's a great deal of grudging respect for them. If I were born there instead of Alton, Illinois, I might certainly be in the North Vietnamese Army. Just a matter of where you were born. They were very good soldiers. They were relentless in fighting, and they got as close as they could get, and it was often a battle of hand grenades as much as anything else. Yeah, the North Vietnamese were far better, far more disciplined, far more aggressive, just a lot tougher. You know? Yeah, they were. It was a completely different circus. And the North Vietnamese would booby trap. If we're chasing them, they know that we're pursuing them. They'll set out what we call a daisy chain of grenades or something of that sort, or sometimes the larger command detonated booby traps. But they don't just willy-nilly set booby traps through an area, because of course they have to walk there more than we do. But with the Viet Cong, they'll take large areas of the countryside and plant booby traps all over the place. But there were crude little punji, everything from crude little punji pits to artillery shells with command detonated wiring on them, you know. But mostly the casualties came from grenade and rifle and machine gun fire. Some of the really bad ones would be like Hastings, where we went against North Vietnamese Division 324B, and there were a lot more of them than we thought there were, you know, and we got in a really bad scrape where we had two perimeters, and both of them were surrounded the whole time we were there. A lot of helicopters were shot down, and a plane or two, and we came really close to running out of ammunition completely. It was a real bad situation. And then Prairie, the Prairie series of operations were bad, especially the first one, where we took a ridge line away from a North Vietnamese unit and fought our way up that ridge line and against their rear guard actions, you know, to try to slow us down. And that was a real bad one too. We took a lot of casualties, and so did they. On Hastings, when we were overrun, the LZ was overrun as we tried to link up with Kilo Company, and they hit us with mortars down the little river, and they hit our rear guard real heavy. We got to what was Kilo's perimeter, and we were really, there was very little ammunition left. And they passed the word that we were going to stay there all night, because we had so many wounded that we couldn't, they weren't walking wounded, you know, they were wounded that we had to carry. And so we were just going to stay in that perimeter and stay there all night. And given the ammunition we had, it wasn't a pretty picture. But then a helicopter came in after dark, which was a very brave thing to do, and they loaded all of the wounded that we could not carry onto that helicopter and evacuated them. And then we snuck out, just went up the hill in the dark and exfiltrated to the top of a mountain, and then put in a real tight perimeter there and held, you know. And we got more ammunition too. So it's in fact, years later, I heard one of our captains say, he said, we were very close to becoming prisoners of war, you know, which wouldn't have been a pretty picture at all. You know, it's either that or some type of wild bayonet charge, you know, out of there. Not so good. That was the beginning of Hastings. And other helicopters were shot down. The helicopter I was on, my sergeant was killed, and in another one of the helicopters, my corporal was, and our corpsman and our medical corpsman were both cut in half as the back of the helicopter broke off after it had crashed, and the blades cut them in half as they ran out. And I was a PFC at the time, you know. So I didn't have a whole lot of experience. Yet both of my senior guys were gone. You know? So you have to go back on into your every aspect of your training and do everything that's right and do it on time. But you have to do a lot of things that are not your job all the time. I mean, because people have a way of dying off. On Hastings, they lost over 500 people in one little river valley. So, but it was pretty much battalion meat grinders. These operations would last a month or 45 days. Some would be shorter operations. But the time between operations would usually just be a couple of days, and then we'd go out again, you know. Well, the days are rather endless, you know, because just because night comes, it doesn't end, you know, because the North Vietnamese probe your lines at night or even try to overrun your position at night. So you're pretty exhausted, really. And that's why wars are fought largely by 19-year-olds, you know, because they have the resilience to take that kind of a physical beating and still function. You know, function without sleep, function without food, function while exhausted. You know, and then you have the leadership of older sergeants and officers who have a tremendous amount of experience and make the right decisions. You know, without them, you're lost. When touching on that subject, I have to say that if we hadn't had the quality of officers and senior NCOs that we had, we would have been killed 5 times over. I mean, it's either happening or it's about to happen. You know, you have to think that way. So you really have to keep your head on a swivel, and you're in areas where here's these mountains, peaks everywhere, covered with jungle, and you know you're being watched. You know, so anything can happen. Well, I never got a scratch on me. I mean, not a damn scratch. But actually, there were a lot of times that I really thought, this is not going to end well, you know. And I can think of a couple times in particular that I really thought it was the end of the line, you know. And I wasn't the only one thinking that. I mean, you could see it on other people's faces. And but things can turn around because of good officers and NCOs. Well, we had a colonel by the name of Masterpool who died about 20 years ago or so now. But he had been in World War II and in the Korean War, and he really knew what he was doing. And he went on all the operations with us and carried his own gear and dug his own foxhole. You know, it was just as though he were a private or a lance corporal. And he was a real upfront guy, you know. Watched over all the small things and took really good care of everyone. But at the same time, I mean, the mission has to be done. And the mission is going to be dangerous and it's going to cost a lot of casualties. Another guy's radio broke and they wanted to, and it was Christmas Eve, and we were out in the field, and for some reason, they said, go ahead and take this radio. I mean, maybe the lieutenant wanted to give me a break or something. So go take this guy's radio, give him your radio, go back to where we were Cam Low at the time, and have him fix this radio as fast as possible and get back out here. You know? So I go back there, and here's like a bunch of guys I know, and from the comm platoon. And it's Christmas Eve, they're getting packages, and one guy gets this huge box of cookies, like a great big box. And we're eating all these stupid cookies, you know, like, and So we got down to, ate down a bit in the cookies, and then here's like these bottle of whiskey is there, you know. So we pull that out, and there's start fishing around, another bottle of whiskey and another bottle of whiskey. So you know, the cookies are just insulation, you know, packing material. So we start drinking, and see, we didn't. You're supposed to get a couple of beers every day there, you know, a couple of cans of beer and 4 cans of soda or something. We never got any of that stuff, you know. We're too far away from everything to get normal supplies, you know. So we had all, you know, beans, bandages, and bullets. But anyway, so now we got booze and we're drinking, and there was a holiday ceasefire. Occasionally they have ceasefires for the Vietnamese holidays and for our holidays, where we wouldn't fire H&Is, you know, where we'd fire artillery at them and they'd fire artillery at us. So we got pretty loaded and then crash out. And the North Vietnamese just mortared the living hell out of that hill. They shift from our position to the artillery position. They really wanted to hit the artillery because we were kind of worthless, but you know, just the radio tent is like, who gives a shit about that? So they just found their impact area on the hill and then just moved it up to where the artillery was. But they creamed these guys in the comm platoon, you know. And the next morning, I just had to get up, and I didn't get a scratch on me. I got the radio and went back into the mountains. You know, it was terrible. You know, that was Christmas. You know, when you look around and there's all these other people depending on you, basically, you just have to do it. I mean, one time we had a mortar round land on a bunker of one of our mortars, on the side, the little ammo bunker. Hit there while one of my friends was eating chow, killed him instantly. Wounded everyone else in the whole gun pit, you know. So then all those guys have to go, you know, they got to go. And so they took some other guys, half of them from the other gun pit, and they put them over there. And this one sergeant we had was a real squared away guy. He said, okay, you take care of this. And like some other things happened that were really terrible with wounded guys. And I said, okay. And like, I'm not you know, I know some of this mortar stuff, but I'm not a mortar guy, you know. But I was, by that time I was a corporal. So I just picked up the chow that was laying down on the lower level of the pit, you know, which wasn't blown away. I picked that up and started eating it. And I started telling these guys to break out mortar rounds. So you do this and you do that. I didn't, you know. And here I am, like, putting food in my mouth and trying to swallow it, you know. You know, it's just what you got to do. Yeah. Well, you're in a life and death situation where you depend on these people and they depend on you. You know, if you have to know that if you get wounded or someone is wounded right near you, the person closest to you is going to run out there and grab you by your cartridge belt suspenders and drag you back under fire. That's love. You know, they might not like something about somebody, but basically everybody has to do what's necessary. They have to do their job. There's no way around that. And if we had somebody that really wasn't any good, they'd get rid of them, you know. They'd just send them somewhere else, you know. So, no, I can't say there was anybody that I couldn't depend upon, you know. Or if you went to them and say, listen, I really need you to help me with this, they'd all say yes, you know. You have to be completely trustworthy. Like, for example, when we were in Okinawa, you could take on payday, you could take your wallet and leave it on your rack and go take a shower. Nobody was ever going to touch it. And whenever anybody got food, and food was, like food from home, was a very big thing. When we were in Vietnam, if somebody got what we called a care package, like your relative sent you something, it was all shared right away. It was the most you could expect to do for in a selfish way was pick one thing out of that box that you might want before you passed it around to everybody else, And that everybody did that. I can't think of anybody that was ever selfish in that way. But that came out of protracted combat. I mean, part of it out of our training, but especially because we were in such dark situations for such a period of time. It was like really black humor. I mean, we were like really rough on each other all the time. Terrible, terrible practical jokes, And taking new guys over to at Dong Ha at the aid station and making them get in a body bag to get measured for their body bag. I set a friend of mine on fire, set his boots on fire one time in a tower 90 feet off the ground, He was asleep. I woke him up. Dennis, we're hit, He tried to jump out of the tower. I could barely hold him back. But, we did that sort of thing, These guys made a bomb out of the tube that mortar rounds come in, and they filled it with all the explosive increments. And I was in this bunker looking for something, and I hear this tukunk, right behind me. I turn around, and there's that bomb sitting there, and there's about that much of a piece of fuse burning on it, So I just really quick pulled the fuse out of it, and it was an empty tube, But yeah, there was a lot of that, and a lot of I remember a guy saying at a couple guys who were dead, and he comes walking up the path with these other guys, and he goes, look at them, Pennsylvania and New York, goddamn Yankees can't take care of themselves in the woods. And we're all that close like this, But it's just the way it is, People come and go, people get wounded and go to the hospital, and some people, we're all in different, we have like a 13-month rotation in the Marine Corps. Then some of us extended for more, but people, it comes their time to go home, and they leave, and it's and they're gone. You were used to it. I mean, everybody was pretty. I mean, there were a few people that cracked up. I mean, people I knew really well went insane there. Completely cracked up, and had to be pulled out of the country. And but mostly, people just go on. You just go on. That's all. We were at Cantien, and I was because I was short, what we call short, meaning you have don't much time left, So they sent, our lieutenant decided to send me back to Dong Ha, which was a airstrip. It was a bigger base, so it was somewhat safer, and Cantien was a small place and hit by a lot of artillery every day. So he said, go ahead, go back there. So they had me go back there, and they had some little company tents and everything, and there were like some typewriter jockey guys back there that I didn't know or anything. And so I went back and told them I was there and that get my paperwork together. And they said, well, you got a working party, which means a working detail. And they said, you got to burn a shitter, which is like you'd have to pour gasoline in these things and burn them. And like, we didn't have that stuff. We were always in the field. So I'm not going to do that. It just like really pissed me off. So I said, I'm not doing it. You can't just tell sergeants you're not doing something. But I did. So, but I didn't know these guys, so it was nothing personal about it. I'm just not doing it. Screw you. So then I'm like, I know I'm in trouble, and I'm just walking around the area. And here's a bunch of our guys on a loading ammunition on a truck, and they're heading back to Compiègne. So I just jumped on the truck with them and went back to the hill, back to the DMZ. And that's a big no-no to just go somewhere else without orders or telling somebody that you're being sent somewhere with good reason. It's called missing movement. So I got up there, and then I was talking to some of my buddies and everything, and the lieutenant saw me and said, what the hell is this? And I told him, and he said, well, don't worry about it. We'll just say we sent for you. And so they radioed back. So I hung around there like a couple of days. And then the battalion was going on an operation, so they were pulling them off of Compiègne, and another battalion was coming from 9th Marines to occupy the hill. And so my guys were this is a real hard story to tell, and it's not my guys went down the bottom of the hill, and then they had to wait down there, and two of my friends came up to the top of the hill. See, that's why it's really, so anyway, they came up the top of the hill, and they sat down next to me, and the three of us just sat there and didn't say anything at all. We just sat there. And then they called for those guys, and they left, and that was it. And I got on a convoy and went back to Dong Ha and got on a plane and went to Da Nang, and I got on another plane and came to the United States. It was rough. It was like, while you're there and things are happening and everything's going on, you just got to do it, and you think you're feeling things, and you see all kinds of stuff, and you think you're, and you're not at all, and it's not until later that you feel it. But it was very, very difficult to leave. And I tried to stay. I talked to the lieutenant about shipping over again, for more time, and said, no. Jesus. No, I mean, that's just the kind of guys they were, and one of those guys was shot twice in the face. After that, lost his left eye and had to have his jaw rebuilt. I went flew to St. Louis and then took a cab home. I just liked a surprise, rather than if I would have called ahead, they would have had all the relatives there and all that crap. I didn't want that kind of thing going on. So I just showed up, and my mother took me to the store, and we went to the grocery store and got some food and beer. Well, even when I was in the Marine Corps, I decided, well, if there's a life after this, I'm going to do exactly what I want to do. I'm not interested in anything that is practical. Practicality didn't mean anything to me. So, and I always liked drawing and painting. So I thought I want to go to art school. So I saved money for school, and when I got out, I decided to take a year to work in a factory to get some more money. And so I went to Chicago and to the American Academy of Art, and I had a big wad of money, and I said I'd like to pay my tuition, of course, in cash, because I didn't know how you did things. It's like, if you want to buy something, you just give them cash. So I said, look, I want to. Here's my tuition money. Is that okay? And they didn't exactly know how to handle that, so they had to go find someone. And came back and they said fine. And so I went home and got a job working in a foundry and went to school a year later. There weren't that many people with long hair and beards in art school. You would think there were, but it was kind of a conservative school, really. It was a hardcore nuts and bolts, the American Academy then. Hard work school. It's good. But yeah, we had this one teacher was like, he didn't like me much, and I couldn't figure it, because I did all my homework and everything. So he was giving me a rough time one time, and I said, hey, listen, I'm older than the rest of these kids, and you can run them around a little bit if you want to. I don't care what you say to them, but I'm not taking this stuff from you. I did 4 years in the Marine Corps, and I'm not into this. And he was like, whoa. I didn't realize that he thought I was like, I don't know what he thought. I was Charles Manson or something, But no, we got along really well after that, And he was in World War II, So, and I like history, so we started talking about a couple things, and of course, a completely different relationship after that. I have to say that, creating a piece of artwork on that subject just concretizes the image. It makes it a solid thing. That aspect of it. It makes that aspect a solid thing. It doesn't make anything go away at all. I mean, it's not like voodoo where you draw it on a piece of paper and throw it in the fire and it's gone. It doesn't work that way at all. And our guys, collectively, we thought there might be some kind of conflict. There wasn't. There was. It was all pretty supportive, really. There was no big negatives. And in fact, we found a lot of other people. Every time we did a show, we found more people. And I think when I left, I think we had 140 something artists, and not just Americans. in the beginning, we thought we just sat around and had brainstorming sessions, over a case of beer, and decided how we would handle different things that came up. And we said, well, what if we get some of our allies? What if we get a Viet Cong? What if we get a North Vietnamese? What do we do about that? So we decided that we'd accept everybody. All we had to do was paint your own experiences, or draw, or what have you, or sculpt, and or photography, and you had to be in combat. That was our basic. That's all it took, and we ended up with Americans, South Vietnamese, former Viet Cong, NVA, Australians, New Zealanders, just about everybody, really, I don't think we got a Filipino. The Filipinos were there for a while, in medical staff. Korean. We got pretty much represented everyone that was in the war. Well, it was a big job, and I have to say, Rick Steinbach did 90% of the actual work. He stamped every dog tag that was there, and he did all of the math to figure out how it would fit into the environment there, which was a big problem, And basically, I designed the piece. And we had a lot of people hanging dog tags on that catwalk there. It took a lot of people to put that thing up. I think the actual work must have taken 4 or 5 months or so. Yeah, took a long time. And I mean, that dog tag machine was stamping, because every time you hit it's like a typewriter, every time you hit the typewriter thing, although it's like really big, but it has a regular keyboard, every time you hit that thing, some kind of spring-loaded hammer thing would go bang and knock the letter into that tag, And you'd hear that echoing through the museum just all day, and sometimes late into the night. He worked like a devil. Yeah. It's when you see it, and each one of those tags has a name. It's a big thing. It's like looking at Arlington Cemetery. If you get into a war, get in it to win. None of this political half-stepping. That's what caused the Vietnam War to be such a quagmire. We could have won that war very decisively, very early, if we would have done some very hard things. But they didn't have the will to do it. Johnson didn't have the will to do it. Nixon didn't have the will to do it. Against the North Vietnamese, I think by and large, they were very successful, but only because we traded our casualties for theirs. I mean, if you hold back and expect air and artillery to do everything, you're not going to get much done, really. Air and artillery can only do something if you're closing with the enemy, and especially when there's a situation where they think they can get you, where there's so many of them that they can, and in fact, I really feel, and a special forces friend of mine backed this up years later. He said, basically they used you guys as bait. They put small amounts of Americans against larger amounts of Vietnamese, much larger amounts of Vietnamese, because the North Vietnamese would be tempted to try to wipe you out. And that made them susceptible to air and artillery, especially air, because we didn't have that much artillery up there in the early stages. But air did a job on them a lot of times. But sometimes, in doing that, air did a job on us too. Because if you're going to be that close, it's not that exact of a science. you know, I think of that, all of that stuff as the most important stuff I ever did in my life. You know. I think the Vietnam War was handled very poorly, you know, especially in the latter phases of it, and I had a lot of complaints about that. However, I think that it was part of World War III that started when World War II ended, and it was necessary, but it was very poorly handled. And but I believed in it, despite its flaws. I believe in the Constitution very much. So, the First Amendment is a part of what we're fighting for. When you join the service, you take an oath to protect the Constitution from against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So everybody has the right of free speech, even though they say things you don't like, you know. So yeah, they have a right to complain about whatever they want to complain. But say if they get drafted, they got to go. You know, they can't get out of it. I couldn't even imagine who I'd be if I hadn't have gone to the Marine Corps and gone to Vietnam. I don't know. I really don't know. But a lot, I would have been a different person. I would have wanted different things. And I would have found different things important. I think, and I think of this from time to time, I mean, I'm not a particularly religious guy, but if there's a hereafter, a heaven, say, I want heaven to be standing in a trench line at Cantien, a few of my friends drinking coffee out of a can, out of a sea ration can. And I want that moment to like go on forever. That'd be great.
I was lucky enough to take vet doc for 2 years, and the experiences that I've had in this class will define who I am for the rest of my life. The first year, I made a documentary on Bob Winkleman, and he was a civilian during World War II, and he sent 3 of his brothers off to war, so I got to see it from the family's perspective. And this year, my veteran was Ned Broderick, and he was in Vietnam. And it was just a really cool experience for me to be able to see both sides to war, not only from the family back at home, but of the soldier fighting off in a different country. I was able to see that there are so many different sides to a story, and everybody's experience is important, and it's important for us to know and understand that not everybody goes through the same thing. Mr. Broderick saw horrific things in Vietnam, and considering he was about the same age that I am now, I've realized I have to appreciate everything in my life, because I don't have to go to war. I don't have to see all the things that he saw. And I'm just so much more appreciative of everything that I have and all the people in my life. I sat in on Ned's original interview, and I was just taken away by his story. The emphasis that he placed on brotherhood and leadership it captured me, and I immediately following the interview, I asked my teacher if I could make his documentary the following year. And I was lucky enough to be able to work on it all year. Ned took those experiences and that horror, and he turned it into something beautiful. He took his experiences and created art, and it just makes me admire him all the more, because he's able to do something with the tragedy that he encountered. He's able to take something awful and make something beautiful out of it. And although that doesn't change the fact that what he went through was awful and traumatic, but it helps us understand a little bit more about what war is actually like and what happened to him. I admire Ned Broderick's strength, and I admire his passion. I wanted to thank him for sharing his story and giving me a little bit more insight into our history. I don't know what type of person I would be if I hadn't taken this class. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Mr. Stange, and thank you, Miss Noonan, for giving me the opportunity to take this class and the opportunity to learn more about not only myself, but about our history and about life in general.